Founding the Ridwan School in 1976 in the East Bay, Dr. Almaas's diamond approach involves intensive training at multiple levels of experience. Dr. Almaas has written over 14 books. Born in Kuwait with both religious and secular influences, Dr. Almaas came to the United States to study physics at UC Berkeley. His interest in science, he realized, was actually a search for the ontological and metaphysical foundations of existence. He has utilized his own realizations to craft a refined and subtle but approachable system of inquiry into the nature of psyche and spirit. This self-inquiry, Hameed explains, is not oriented towards a particular state. I think it's important for us to all keep that in mind, as most spiritual teachings tend to be, but is an open-ended inquiry into the nature of human experience and reality, an inquiry that both uses and realizes our spiritual depths. Please join me in extending a very warm welcome to A. Hameed Almaas.
Well, thanks, Karen. I think you described it well. I don't know if I need to say any more. I remember when I was in college in Berkeley, studying physics and math. That was my orientation, to study reality, and physics was my way of finding the truth. But I remember that every time I saw a book of Freud, I couldn't help but devour it. Every time I saw it, in friends' homes usually, I didn't seek them. Just whenever I find it, open it, it was very interesting. I didn't know at that time where it was going. As Karen said, things changed and transformed so that I had to leave physics and mathematics and engage in a more psychological and spiritual inquiry, which for me, from the beginning, partly because of the teachers I worked with, the influences were in my life, and partly because of the culture in the Bay Area, I think. Partly because I came from a different culture to this culture. Various influences that made it such that my own process of opening and realization simply does not separate the spiritual from the psychological. It's only reflecting back on it and studying the history, we can see that thousands of years ago there was not spirituality and psychology. They were the same thing. It was just spiritual teachings, and spiritual teaching always included a psychology. There is no such thing as a spiritual teaching that doesn't include psychology. Spiritual teaching has to address our emotions, feelings, images, memories, and difficulties in life and behavior. In fact, spiritual teaching are addressed to deal with that. So they always included psychology. So now we find ourselves where there seem to be two different things. That, of course, has to do with a lot of historical development in Western culture, which led to development of a system that is called psychology, and depth psychology, psychoanalysis is really the heart of depth psychology. And now when we study spirituality, when we're moved, when we're called to engage the spiritual quest, we think of it as different from psychology, and psychology then, when we see it, it means dealing with problems. It's therapy. But when you look at really the traditional teachings, they always had this psychology. Buddhism used Abhidharma. Abhidharma is the psychology of Buddhism. When they say Buddhism is not psychology, they mean they don't use psychodynamic psychology. They don't use modern psychology. They use the psychology that they developed that was dominant there. The various yogas used the various Indian psychologies that was present in their time. The Sufi system used the psychology, what they call it, the science of the soul, that was present in their time. The various, Jewish, Kabbalistic, and Christian spiritualities always used, but they were the sources of psychology at that time. The bifurcation happened with the Enlightenment and the Renaissance, which separated science from spirituality, which turned out to be a good thing, and developed something, secular psychology, which I think developed psychology to areas that couldn't have done before when it was connected with spirituality. But our experience is simply total. It includes all. It includes the physical, it includes the psychological, it could include the inner processes and outer behavior, and includes our spirituality. So I was thinking, looking at the topic of the seminar, but I wasn't really going to give exactly teaching, as more as trying to give my understanding from my personal experience how psychology and spirituality intertwine and intersect, and use my own personal experience to do that. I'm quite indebted actually to depth psychology, especially psychoanalysis, because my own spiritual awakening happened so much by including the insight that psychoanalysis has developed in its various theories, all the way from the Freudian to the ego psychology, object relation, intersubjectivity, attachment theory. All of those have added to the spiritual openness, and for me, opened the door for spirituality to present dimensions of itself that I think will be difficult to appreciate without the knowledge that we have in our contemporary psychology. For instance, when we think now of psychology and spirituality, we think of psychology as the common, ordinary experience of our inner states, mental mechanisms, of our behaviors, the underlying basis. And we think with spirituality, we think of the infinite and the transcendent and the transpersonal. But I think that's because, my view, is because we're comparing modern depth psychology with Eastern spirituality. If we look at it from the perspective of Western spirituality, like Kabbalistic and Sufi or Christian, their spirituality, the Kabbalah doesn't just talk about the transcendent, the infinite. It has so many dimensions and levels of things that are appropriate for life, for personal life, because that is what the Western culture has emphasized. It emphasized the role of the individual, not that the Eastern tradition, the Eastern civilization didn't value the individual. But the Eastern tradition tended to want to get out of the individual life and the personal engagement, and they thought of freedom mostly as detachment and freedom from that, just like you see it in the usual Indian system, is that you're a householder before you engage your spiritual practice. You first do your life, and then you go and engage spirituality. So many of the spiritual tradition developed as monastic things, are away from life. And my understanding, that by itself will orient us toward a kind of spirituality that values and appreciates the infinite, the transcendent, the non-dual, which are actually the depth of spirituality, the ground of spirituality from all spiritual tradition. If you look at the Kabbalah, they think of the transcendent, and the infinite is the ultimate that need to be arrived at. But they will say if you just realize that your realization is actually not complete. You need to also realize the individual and the personal and how to express that infinity, not just by seeing everything manifesting out of you, but by being a person interacting with your husband or your wife personally, with the perfect qualities of that transcendence in your personal interaction as a human being. The Eastern tradition, of course, they did that. The realized people did that. However, it isn't a big part of the philosophy. So because the diamond approach, the work that I'm engaged in, is developed within first a contemporary culture and always been aware of both the Eastern and the Western influences and very much aware of psychological theories and methods. And I had teachers that from both sides. Something emerged that broad dimension of spirituality that shows the connection to psychology in a very direct, immediate way. So in my experience in the work I do, I don't do spiritual practice, and on the side I do psychological work. That for me is artificial, in my experience. Many people try to bring the two together, and many people are doing it in various ways. The way it has developed in that approach is just one of the ways. And it happens to be a way that from the beginning, it doesn't see them as an addition of one to the other, but as inherently connected and inseparable from our experience. They're really, the way I see it, is like you're trying to separate the organs of your body from the atoms of your body. The organs are the particular psychological experiences. The atoms is the infinite ground. They are the same thing, and they're completely entwined. And when they say a non-dual experience, that is a metaphor that helps us understand what non-dual is, really. They are always the same thing. So our emotions, our feelings, our behaviors are simply the form that manifests within a deeper field that psychology in time isn't aware of or doesn't address directly. But I think, and I was thinking about what I was going to talk about yesterday, writing a few notes, and one of the thoughts that occurred to me is if psychoanalysis is really interested, as it seems to be, in really understanding the self and its foundation, it's bound to stumble upon the spiritual. There is no other way. It can't be another way. It can't go anywhere. And in some sense, it is. It has been in many parts of it. So I usually think one of my odd thoughts I have is that there has been a bifurcation, but the human nature is a human nature, and the bifurcation is bound to come reintegrate together because human nature is going to have to assert itself regardless. And it is happening in various ways, in many ways. I think the contributions of contemporary depth psychology, starting with Freud, has been so tremendously useful for our culture. It's become so much part of our culture we can't actually think that way. I mean, we can't think without that. And our culture is becoming worldwide, is so psychological in nature. People can't imagine understanding and talking to each other without knowing there's such a thing as unconscious. It has become normal. That wasn't known before Freud, or wasn't formulated in that clear way. The spiritual thing will tell you, well, the Kabbalah really knew about the unconscious. Yeah, they're sort of known, but they didn't specifically, clearly say there is an unconscious motivation that make you behave this way. No spiritual teaching has done that before. Psychoanalysis discovered that, and for me, has been such a momentous discovery. And it is being used by many of the people who try to connect the spirituality and psychology, most of the time not giving credit to the people who actually came up with that observation. There's the idea of unconscious and what I call the science of psychodynamics, which is the recognition that our conscious experience in terms of emotions, thoughts, impulses, patterns of behavior and interaction are largely and mostly influenced by unconscious currents that are, we don't just feel what we feel because somebody says such and such. There is a lot going on, and a lot of it is unconscious, we're not aware of. So psychoanalysis, the psychology in general, uses what's called psychodynamic, which is understanding our experience by seeing what is its unconscious underpinnings. What are the forces and the structures in the beliefs and the conceptualization that actually make us experience ourselves the way we do, feel the way we do, and behave the way we do. The other thing that I found very useful from understanding psychoanalysis is that psychoanalysis unknowingly has mapped out, discovered, researched, and mapped out what is the self, what composes it, how does it develop, what are the stages of its development, what are the mechanisms that makes it become the way it is. And that's done through the discipline called ego psychology, object relation theory, and things. Basically, it's the understanding of what's called representation, that ego structures, the building blocks of the self, are structures in the psyche that are formed by our early experience, specifically our early experience with our significant others, with our caretakers. And that through a process of internalization, of impressions that become part of inner psyche, that become unconscious to us, impel us to become the self that we know ourself to be. Now, all the spiritual tradition, their main thing is the study of the self, deconstructing the self, to recognize what else is there. Because the deconstruction of the self is the way to realize what spiritual tradition think of another ground, deeper ground to our experience that is not constructed, that is actually one area, which is to understand the question of construction and deconstruction. And the self became constructed, in the sense, from the beginning, all the time, from Melanie Klein to Jacobson, Mahler, and all these individuals, brilliant individuals. They saw how the sense of self develops by impressions that are collected, organized in some kind of way, and become what is called psychic structures, which means our mind, our consciousness is structured and patterned in such a way that it become unconscious, but gives us a sense of identity, sense of individuality with its various characteristics that we end up believing who we are. That's an area where I really appreciated psychoanalytic theory, but at the same time I saw how it tended to veer away from the spiritual by egomorphizing process, which is like Jacobson and Mahler and all of those. They saw that the self is constructed, that through the internalization of experiences, through the identification with our memories and organize these memories, we get to know our sense of self. But the way they look at it, and I remember studying the text, I said, oh, why does he say that? Which is what they say, is as the sense of self-image developed and the self-image that represented developed, the psychologists take it to mean now we know ourselves. They recognize it as a construct, but the tendency was to believe that the construct led us to recognize who we are, instead of no, it is a construct. We developed a construct, and that's what we ended up knowing ourselves. So what is not known then which spiritual tradition tend to know, is that if the construct is really construct, that we need to be dealt with as a construct. It is not really what we really are. That's what we end up believing ourselves to be. And it needs to be deconstructed so we could find out what else are we. I'll give you an example. I remember dealing with the question of body image. You know, part of the processes I went through. At some point, partly reading some psychoanalytic literature, partly I'm engaged in meditation practices and looking into myself. And part of the influences in my background is from Karen Horney, who developed self-analysis, and one of my teachers was her student. So I developed a way of inquiring to myself, just analyzing my experience and trying to understand it. At some point I recognized that there is a body image. I had an image of my body, and reading and studying psychoanalytic literature, it's clear it is developed through experiences from early childhood, through interaction with the physical world, with others, being held and touched and interacted with. And then we end up having an experience of ourselves that is really patterned by this body image. But when I recognize this body image, I didn't take it to mean now I'm experiencing my body. That's what I naturally have done growing up. But in finally recognizing, oh, there is an image. It's not just my body, there is an image of my body. And usually we have difficulties with our body image, and that's how it comes up. Well, I'm too short, or this, I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm not beautiful, and all the thing about our body, and how also the history of how our body was treated, how it was looked at. But by exploring the body image at some point, and seeing it as an image, it became obvious to me it is really an image, in the sense I saw it as a mental construct. I experienced it as, instead of feeling my body as having arms and legs and head and nose and all of that, I saw that as an image in my mind. I was able to separate the image from my direct, immediate experience. And as I saw it as an image, the image revealed its mental character. It became like a thought, ephemeral like a thought. And as it became ephemeral as a thought, the resulting experience is a spaciousness. I discovered is that every time I deal with a kind of an image or a representation, I recognize it for what it is, a representation, which is exactly what psychoanalysis says. It's a representation. And I recognize it as a representation. The representation, because it is a thought, it simply becomes ephemeral and not patterning the experience right now, and leaves the experience in the now free to reveal what it is. First, for me, to reveal that sense of space, being myself as an infinite, boundless, empty spaciousness. It was scary at the beginning, of course. I'm going to lose myself, because body image is really such a big foundation of the sense of self, as older psychologists know. And usually in the practice of therapy, we try to work with issues of the body image, of the self-image, so that we can have a better image of ourselves. We can have a more correct image of our body. So when I saw, I had, some kind of images of my body that turned out wasn't accurate the way actually my body is at the present time. A lot of it had to do with my childhood and early experience. But it wasn't just, so there was a healing of the self-image, but in the healing, in this inquiry, also there was a discovery, a revelation of something else beyond what is constructed through the image. First there was this spaciousness, and then when I felt my body from this spaciousness, it didn't feel the way I usually experience my body. That showed me that the experience of my body and the self-image is not what is naturally the experience of the body. The experience of my body became like the body became much lighter, much more spacious, much more fluid, much more open, and actually, in time, as I explored it, the body turned out to be a form of liquid light. Like when it is not structured by the image that we have developed of the body, which we learn to experience as our body. When we are free of that, let go of that, it's like liquid light, and that is what many people call presence. One way of experiencing presence, that the body is a manifestation of consciousness, manifestation of presence. And really, that goes to the very core of spiritual experience. What is spiritual experience? Spiritual experience is basically experiencing our consciousness free from the construct of the mind, free from the patterning of the past. And that is another point that I wanted to say about psychoanalysis, actually, that I think is very apropos here. I noticed psychoanalysis recently is being influenced a great deal by postmodern thought, postmodern philosophy. Postmodern philosophy, of course, emphasizes the question of construction and deconstruction. So the recognizing that our experience is constructed in the mind is part and parcel of how depth psychology has been developing anyway, except postmodern philosophy takes it to more further limits, saying that all experience is constructed. There is only constructed experience. You cannot have an experience that is not influenced by your past, that is not influenced by your culture, that is not influenced by your ethnic groups. And although that is largely true for ordinary experience, spiritual experience exactly means freedom from those things. So, but again, psychoanalysis, by trying to make itself more contemporary, go along with the new trends in science and philosophy, is as a crossroad, I think, again. It's one of those challenges. Like there's something useful in postmodern philosophy in emphasizing the constructed nature of our experience, but at the same time, deconstruction can go too far, which is eliminating that there is truth that can actually be apprehended with certain facts. Some of them say there is no truth, it's only agreement. It's a truth is a convention. That's really the extreme of postmodern thought. And some psychoanalysts try to accommodate to that. And I said, why? You don't need to. Postmodern philosophy has its advantage, but it also it has its excesses. And postmodern philosophy tried to enlist the Buddhist philosophy, which is the ultimate ground is nothing, is emptiness. But Buddhist philosophy also says when we recognize emptiness, we recognize the nature of appearance. There is still experience, there is forms. And the forms we experience are free from construction. So it is possible to have forms of experience, specific, particular manifestations that are actually free from culture, free from past, free from the mind, but they're really freely arising right in this moment. Otherwise, there isn't any spirituality. If everything is just deconstructing and there's nothing left, that's what's called the side of nihilism. And what is truth? Spirituality is about finding truth, finding fundamental truth, truth independent from our mind, truth independent from our history. So as you notice, I'm myself in constant dialogue, in terms of my experience with both, psychoanalysis and spiritual experience. For me, the two are dialoguing in constant, not only dialogue, the dialectic and looping. They're giving, it's a feedback loop that is deepening and intensifying, and sometimes to some kind of discoveries that are actually amazing. Give you an example of a form of experience that is actually a form that is not constructed, free from construction, but it is a particular experience. And that's again bring in what I found the usefulness of psychoanalytic concepts and theory. For instance, I'll give the idea that not only there are representations, self is not based mostly on a representation, a self-image, self-concept, but that self-image has component self-images, some component structures. And it is the overall integration of all of that that gives us a sense of our normal sense of self. So we can deal with the self as a whole, see, and that is what many spiritual methods tends to do, which is look at the self, at the fact that there is a self-identification, the individual, personal self, and deconstruct it or set it aside to be open to something that is fundamental, timeless, and not construct. And of course, that is a known tendency and methodology in spiritual tradition. But I found out by using psychoanalytic concept, there are other ways. That's not the only way. That it is possible to look at some of the components of the self. That also looking at the self as a whole is not easy. For most people, it's simply inaccessible. Most people don't even know when they say yourself, what is that? They just know they are themselves, and they can't really isolate the self. It takes a great deal of meditation practices before you begin to recognize what is really the self and what are its manifestations and how to disengage from it. But it is easy for people to appreciate and to relate to something like self-esteem. When you question about self-esteem, feeling of worth or worthlessness, everybody here, I'm sure, can relate to that. Right? So, psychoanalysis and psychotherapy in general, one of the things they deal with is the question of self-esteem, how self-esteem is really important, and how it is important to deal with disturbances and problems in self-esteem so that the person will have a deeper or a more secure or higher esteem of themselves, which strengthen the self, which make them more capable of living life in a more satisfying way. So I was dealing with that at some point, the question of self-esteem. And of course, the issue that arises usually is disturbance to self-esteem, which is feeling not recognized or feeling a sense of worthlessness, whether I'm not sure about my worth or my sense of value. So I was looking at the question of self-esteem and exploring it. I will discuss a little later what I mean by exploring it. Basically, feeling the feelings and immediacy of the experience. Part of the inquiry that I have developed is that there is an immediacy of experience, that I'm needing to sense my body, feel my emotion, aware of my thought, and seeing my behavior, and recognizing how my behavior is related to my feelings and emotions and my thoughts, and not just witnessing it from a distance as an observer, as some meditation practice do, but feel it with awareness without at the same time believing what I am experiencing as a final truth. So it is immediacy and fullness of experience without identification. So meditation practice help you not identify, but some of the meditation practice tends to take you away from the immediacy and the fullness of the experience. The way I have developed it, or the way I've learned it, is to be in the midst of the experience. To be feeling the emotion that was feeling worthless, or remember what it is, what was some kind of relationship or situation, was worthlessness, feeling of not good enough, and so intense, feeling pain and hurt, and feeling small, and seeing how because of that I will tend to withdraw and not speak my mind, or when I interacting with somebody and don't come out totally with my truth because I don't think the other person will really value my truth, So all of that was a whole constellation, I was immediately, completely immersed in and exploring it, but still with a slight hint that I never lose that I'm exploring it. It is not just experience. I'm feeling it, exploring it, but I am exploring it, I'm experiencing it, and it is a practice. It is an exploration. It's not simply an identified experience. So, as usual, will happen in depth psychology, as we explore this feeling, they will begin to reveal their underlying unconscious content. Just began to remember my relationship with my father, and how my father, even though he loved me, he didn't exactly, see me for who I am, and sometimes he didn't think I was good enough, and I had polio, for instance, when I was very young, and for him it was a big disappointment. It was his first son, for a Middle Eastern man, and his first son, there was something wrong with him. Later on, I realized it meant castration to him, really. For some reason, my leg became his penis and became limp. And, he loved me. He couldn't help it. He didn't understand it. But so the feeling in the present moment of worthlessness, of not being recognized, of not being appreciated, got brought up. This history. And the history, of course, is very vulnerable, very profound. The feeling of hurt and some worthlessness were intense, because at that time, as a child, we are very impressionable and vulnerable, and our parents are like the gods. How they feel about us really makes our day and make it, basically. And feeling that and in exploring it with full awareness, that began to correct my sense of self-esteem. But I noticed at some point that regardless of what I experienced, what I learned about the underlying unconscious underpinning, there was always still a tendency. I wasn't feeling worthless, but I still wanted people to appreciate me. It was a little miffed if somebody doesn't respect me, and a little disappointed if somebody didn't get the meaning of what I'm saying. So it was the continuing inquiry. It was continual. How come? Why am I feeling like there's still some layer of identification with worthlessness that wasn't completely explained by the history? So I stayed with it, remained with it, which means exploring it and feeling it with the attitude that I don't know. Why? So an important part of this inquiry is coming to a place of suspending our beliefs and ideas. Like, I experience it, see this manifestation, I don't understand them. I don't know what they're about. It's a difficult place for us to get to feel something important about ourselves, and to recognize, I don't know what it means. I don't know what's it about. And this goes to the very heart of the kind of inquiry that I engaged in and that I teach, which is to recognize at some point that most of the time we don't know what the hell is going on with us. We usually believe, I know I'm feeling such and such, and I'm this kind of person, and this is going. But that's really the most superficial thing. It's true, we know these things, but if we just inquire a little bit, you realize, I don't know why I'm feeling that way. I don't even know, I'm feeling, an itch on my side, but if you're looking inquire, it turned out to be anxiety. And even if you know the anxiety, it doesn't mean we know it. We don't know why we're anxious. You think I'm anxious because I have an interview. No, you're anxious not because you have an interview, because you believe it's going to be your father there who never accepted you. That's bringing the question of transference. So we don't know usually these, but we believe we know. It is really intrinsic in psychoanalytic inquiry also that we have to acknowledge our humility, that we don't really know what's going on. You cannot really apply psychodynamic, if you take the position that you know, you understand what's happening, we have to acknowledge that we don't understand it. And for me, that goes through the whole process of inquiry. Turns out, not knowing is actually a manifestation of an inner spaciousness that goes to the very heart of what is called spiritual emptiness, the emptiness of the ultimate ground. It manifests generally in the sense when we innocently, humbly feel, I don't know, without rejection, without trying to change it. And that is part of the inquiry that I engage in. I'm feeling this tendencies to want to be recognized or slighted if I'm not, and seeing that I don't know why. What's that about? Now, in most psychological theories, we say, well, it's normal, that's a natural thing, that everybody wants to be recognized, everybody wants to feel good about themselves, they want to have self-esteem and reflection, mirroring from other people. It's a natural thing, we all need it, and it is true. However, it's not true about realized individuals. It's not true about the spiritual ground doesn't care if somebody sees it or not. It cares that each sees itself. Now, I didn't know that at that time. I didn't know. So I was just inquiring into this kind of manifestation and staying with it. And at some point, in this not knowing, immediacy of actually, but in a questioning mind, in a curious, what I really wanted to know. And I wanted to know because I didn't want to know so it will get better. I didn't want to know what's behind this tendency for my self-esteem to be shored up, because I wanted my self-esteem to get better. That is another bifurcation from therapy. It's taking the science of the mind part of it, which is that I just want to find. It's like pure science. I'm looking at my experience as a pure scientist. I want to know why, what's this about? Why it's happening? I don't know where it's going to go. I don't know what the explanation is. At the same time, it is a difficult personal thing. It is a personal manifestation. So it touches me personally. So the question is personally relevant. I'm not inquiring into some kind of abstract thing. It's not I'm exploring self-esteem and I'm getting subject and people doing. I'm not doing that. I'm really immersed in it. It's for me. It's the feeling is important for me. At the same time, there is some deeper motivation, which is wanting just to know it, wanting to find out what is its truth. And I think all of us have deep within us, because we are a human being, that we just want to know. We want to find out what makes us tick. Who are we and why are we the way we are? And the fact that many of us are involved in something like psychology or spirituality is an expression of that. So as you see, I'm telling you a story at the same time I'm trying to give you a flavor of the methodology that I use. So there is immediacy of experience in whichever way, all the ways, all the modalities of sense, and all dimensions of experience, thoughts, feeling, impulses, behavior, patterns. At the same time, there is an interest to know what it is and what's it about, and a kind of love, a kind of devotion to find out exactly what it is the same impulse I had when I was a physicist. I just really wanted to know what reality is. Here, reality, I'm trying to know reality through my own experience. So by exploring this manifestations, wanting some kind of shoring up of my self-esteem or some kind of reflection, staying with it, I realized at some point there is a place in me that began to manifest itself because I wasn't trying to change it, because I wasn't trying to manipulate it, because I was present in it. I'm interested in finding its truth. It began to reveal its truth. Revealed to me a principle in time that our love, interest to find the truth of reality is one side The other side of it is reality itself, its tendency and energetic dynamism to reveal its truth. They're actually the same thing, felt from two sides. That is again an expression of non-dual experience. This is a manifestation of non-duality in duality. We're having a dual experience, but the fact that I'm interested to know what is the truth for what it is really the non-dual truth moving toward revealing itself. And I'm experiencing this dynamic power of reality to reveal the truth as my own interest and questioning of the reality. Because I'm still in a non-dual perspective, I'm still a self relating to my experience. And that is one of the principles of the diamond approach, is that we work with duality, but we are always aware it is always non-dual. We don't work with the non-dual only when we are aware of non-dual. We work with the non-dual within dual experience. Which reminds me a lot of Dogen Zenji, one of the Zen masters, who for him said, duality and non-duality are really the same. Reality is dual and non-dual at the same time. That we cannot escape non-duality because it's the truth of reality, even when our experience is dual. And when our experience is dual, it's basically because of the construct in our mind, but non-duality can't help but manifest itself one way or another, because it is what is. So anyway, getting back to the story. I'm trying, you see, to bring in so many threads together to illustrate a whole view and a whole methodology, which usually takes me several years to do. It took me many years to learn it. So at some point, the field that's being revealed that there's some place where I felt there is just no sense of worth, complete absence of worth. There's not only worthlessness, like some place in here that was utmost deficiency, of complete deficiency of esteem. I felt not only worthless, it was like meaningless, not counting for anything, I'm nothing, I'm nobody, not important. And it felt like a deficiency. And we're all familiar with it if we do psychodynamic therapy. At some point, we find there's some kind of deficient place where there is an extreme. It is not explained by the history. So when I got to a place where not only of low esteem, but of no self-esteem, the absolute no self-esteem, complete absence of sense of value for myself. And that appeared again as some kind of nothingness, an emptiness. I was nothing. So I was feeling I was nothing, and the nothing was both psychological and literal. I was feeling like I don't amount to nothing, and I was feeling some kind of nothingness in the heart, in the chest, like it's empty there. And this emptiness, when I felt it, it was an empty, a deficient emptiness that is characterized by a very clear singular feeling. No value. I have no value, absolutely. No value, no sense of worth. Which was, of course, very difficult to stay with. Because who wants to experience that? And it feels like this is the bottom of myself, the bottom of reality, is that there's nothing. When I saw that, I said, well, no wonder. I still want somebody to give me value. A little mirroring, a little success, thinking about, I've accomplished that, I accomplished this, my meditation is really good, I'm getting to now the transcendent, transpersonal, all of these things. I said, no wonder my mind goes in those directions. Because this underlying here is someplace where I'm conscious. You see, bring the psychodynamic again. Was something unconscious was affecting my conscious experience and motivation and behavior, which is a sense, some place of just no value. And staying with that, feeling it, the same immediacy, with the same, what the hell is that? At the beginning, when it felt like an actual vacuity and emptiness, it wasn't like I felt the emptiness of the whole universe. No, my heart was empty. My chest, my whole chest cavity was nothing, and not only nothing, but it's like, it wasn't like the spaciousness I experienced before. More like dark, dingy, nothing, with a singular feeling of no value. And when I experienced that, my history came back again, and I saw the wounds to the sense of value from early childhood. Deep wounds that feel like gashes in the heart, like bloody cuts. So when we have that immediacy of experience, the emotional hurt appears as if it is actually a physical hurt, like a cut or a gap, or you might even feel it as a bloody mess in your heart. The hurts and the wound become literal. It's the psyche is actually a lot more than thoughts. The psyche, the consciousness, is a field of sensitivity, a field, a continuum of consciousness where it can feel. When you feel the hurt there, it feels as if there is a cut or a gap. And feeling the first, the wound, the emptiness, no value, and then the wound that comes, and as I stayed with the hurt and the wound, and I noticed that in the wound began to fill something else I wasn't aware of, I wasn't expecting. It became juicy. It began to fill out. It's like, it became like something subterranean was bubbling up and filling the heart, filling my consciousness. First filled the heart cavity and felt, first of all, like it has an immediacy that's 1,000 times more immediate than feeling emotion. It's like I was totally immediately feeling this. It's like something that was arising, a kind of a form of experience that is totally immediately feeling itself from all points of time, space in it. There was no observer observing it. It itself is a consciousness that was conscious of what is it. Like when you're feeling an emotion, when you're feeling a sadness, you're not up here feeling a sadness. The sadness really has its own sensitivity within itself. It is through the field of the heart that you feel sad. It is like that. However, there's a purity of the experience. There's no resistance to it, no obscuration. There was clarity and openness with an immediacy of some kind of fluid consciousness that is arising, that felt like a fullness that is consciously aware of its fullness. And the fullness felt not only was a fullness, it has many characteristics that then will clarify many of the things I want to say. First of all, it has a sweetness. It's sweet. Yummy. It was like almost some kind of a pudding. It's like, am I feeling my endocrine system? Am I feeling, I couldn't tell, am I feeling my blood? But then after a while I wasn't just feeling it here, it was all around me. It was extending beyond the body. But the important thing about it that I saw, it felt sweet and felt full. And when I felt the sweetness and the fullness, I realized it has a particular, very specific affect, a feeling. There was a knowingness to it that is not separate from the affect. The feeling and the knowing were the same thing. The feeling and the knowing and the immediacy, the awareness of the experience, were completely the same thing and differentiated. And the knowingness was value. I am experiencing value. Pure value. It's just value. Nothing else. I couldn't call it anything else. I said, sweet. Feels like it's hot. It's love. No. I'm feeling value. It's not love. It is a kind of love, but it is specifically a sense of inherent value. A value that has nothing to do with my history, nothing to do with what I've done, nothing to do with who am I, big, small, smart, beautiful, nothing. It's just existing as value. So no. For me, that was a revelation. Imagine the healing power of that revelation. That within me, within my consciousness, that my consciousness itself, my mind itself, has inherent to it, intrinsic to it, a sense of value, a sense of worth. That the word worth actually doesn't give it, describe it as esteem, it's pure value. And I realize it is this value, this sense of value that usually orients my mind toward what I value, what I don't value. I put value on whatever I value. And I realize, first of all, that value is not something for me to seek. It's not something for anybody to give me. I want people to see my value because I didn't see it. And my value not because of what I did, not because of what I accomplished. No, it's the fact that as a human being, as this experiencing consciousness, inherently there's value in that. There is a value that makes human being care about value. Did you ever wonder, why do people care about self-esteem? Can you imagine a snake caring about self-esteem? Human beings do. Why? Do you ever wonder? Why do we care about self-esteem? Why is it important? Why is it a category of experience at all? I understood there why it's a category of experience. It is a characteristic of our inherent nature. Inherently, our consciousness has something in it that reveals to the ordinary, that the ordinary consciousness will experience it as pure value, a pure preciousness. Pure mean not a result of something, not constructed by my mind. The other thing about the sense of value that I realized not a construct of my mind is that the experience was so immediate. The awareness itself, it felt like a pure awareness. Pure in the sense it is the presence of awareness. This value that I was experiencing, that I'm experiencing right now, is not a conclusion, not a result, but it is pure awareness, meaning there is an awareness right now that is aware of itself, that is self-aware, aware of itself as awareness, as the very being, the very truth of awareness that make me be aware. It is the awareness that is the ground of awareness. Not aware, when I don't mean I am aware that I'm aware. No, I'm aware of what is aware. I'm aware of the source of awareness. I'm aware of the very stuff of awareness. That awareness turned out to be an actual field that is the very bottom of my consciousness. The fact that I have consciousness, that I have experience, is because I am an awareness. And that awareness is not only a capacity, is a medium, is a truth, a fundamental truth. And I can actually see the awareness utilizing the mind, utilizing the brain, utilizing the neurons to differentiate itself and to have specific particular experiences in the physical world. It is possible, as we inquire to see, that awareness is more fundamental than neurons. It's again another threshold for psychoanalysis because of the rising and developing knowledge of neuroscience, which is adding to our knowledge a great deal of understanding, but also has a physical reductionism to it. If you know where the place of particular psychological tendency come from, it is produced by that. Instead of recognizing, no, it comes through there. That's one way of seeing it. It is sourced by that particular part of our limbic system. Another way of seeing it, that particular part of our limbic system is really the conduit for something more fundamental that spiritual people have always known as pure consciousness and pure awareness. And the mind is a conduit. I mean, the brain is a conduit for it. The brain is important, significant. We cannot do without it in embodied life. However, that's not where awareness comes from. The important thing here about value, to get back to it, you see, is that it is pure awareness, aware of itself. But aware of itself now, not only aware of itself, but aware of its value, that it is the source of all value. It is the most valuable thing. It is pure value. It is what underlies all values, not just in what is valuable, my money, my wife, my husband, my work. All of these are valuable, but they are valuable because they make it possible for me and for them to experience the true value, which is this intrinsic awareness. So here, I'm experiencing pure awareness, but experiencing it as manifesting explicitly its fact that it is pure value. Now, when you ask any spiritual person who has some realization, what's the value of your awareness, of your realization? They tell you, it is itself. It is its value. It is implicit in all dimensions of spiritual realization. It is implicit in all the ways that spirit manifests itself. But I'm seeing in this experience is not only implicit, it can manifest itself explicitly in a differentiated quality that can know itself. And I have gotten to it, not by meditating, but psychodynamically exploring my self-esteem. And by exploring the sense of value, I not only know my value, but I have discovered something else, that value is presence, is really a quality of presence. And by exploring the fact that it's not just I'm feeling value, it's not an emotion, it is really a self-existing value. And then when I explored, so the inquiry continues. I'm experiencing values. Okay, great. I got my value. Done. Right? And I've done that many times. You know, I've gone through that countless times. But if I did that, what happens after that? There's a reification of value, something I own, and there's somebody that owns it. Instead of arguing, I know. I am the value. But that is the danger, the spiritual path that happens anyway. It's not an avoidable danger, it's a danger just to be aware of and address. So important thing in recognizing this sense of value is that I understood in it. It's not just that what I am is intrinsic value. And I also understood in it that this intrinsic value is pure presence, is I amness. And when I'm experiencing the value, I don't feel I am valuable. The experience is I am value. And of course, experiencing oneself as value help us see our value system, where we put our value. And we can see what takes us away from the intrinsic value and what brings us closer to the intrinsic value. It becomes a compass, a guiding principle. Because many of the things we do take us away from our own value because we're trying to get it from outside, through this success, through this acclaim, through this admiration, through this recognition, through one way or another. And we do it, and it's not like those things are not important. They're important. We need to live our life. But those don't really give us our value. When we recognize our value, those ways of success or accomplishment are ways we express our value. This value is we give it. We give it to the world, we give it to our life. When we know who we are, It doesn't matter if somebody recognizes my value or not, because my value is independent of anybody's mind, including mine. And this sense of value is independent of any culture, independent of any history, independent of any construct. And the interesting thing, it is a real, immediate form of experience. This is an example of a form of experience that is not constructed by mind or history or background. It is purely, spontaneously arising in awareness, and it is awareness itself manifesting something inherent to it, implicit to it, but in manifesting it in an explicit way, because in my individual personal experience, I needed to know it. And it's like our being, our true nature is the most loving, the most compassionate, the most intelligent, the most generous. Reality will give us exactly what we need if we're really open to it. But if I am trying to manipulate, get it from one way or another, it's like you're trying to pray to God to give you mercy, but at the same time you want mercy from your boss or from your wife. God tell you, when you come back, talk to me truly, I will give it to you. But as long as you're trying to give from other ways, you're not listening. That's the other thing we see when we discover the spiritual ground, is that it is not just a reality that is pure awareness, that is a vastness, that is eternity and timelessness, which it is, but it is energetic, dynamic, and responsive, and it responds to the particulars of the situation. It arose in me as value because I was personally investigating and needing value. At other time, I was needing and exploring other things. Like one time, I was dealing with separation issues, which is one of the primary issues that depth psychology dealing with. Like we need to feel separate sometimes. We have issues when we separate from our original parent or our mother, whether it was allowed or not, the fear of separating and being in our own. But separation is needed for our individuation or autonomy. In fact, each time we go to a deeper experience, spiritual realization, we have to deal with the issue of separation. Because we are separating. Every time we're going into a sense of presence, we are separating from the outside. We're separating from the internalized world. We're separating from internalized object relation, which we cannot help but take it to be we're separating from other people. I'm separating from my mother. So just experiencing myself as presence, that's independent of the mind, made me feel, oh, my mother isn't going to like that. She'll feel abandoned. And brought up the whole issues about separation. And can I do it? Can I be that way by myself without that support? That brought the issues of separation and the anxiety and the conflict around, and staying with it the same way. Dealing with it the same way as I've dealt with the question of self-esteem. I reckon at some point I couldn't separate really, because I haven't got it. I haven't got the wherewithal to do it. I'm not strong enough to do it. I don't have the energy, the strength, and the power to really, truly stand on my own. And standing in my own is really standing apart from my mind. It's apart from the construct and the history. However, it will manifest personally as I cannot stand apart from my teacher, apart from my wife, apart from my mother. Because psychodynamically, in our sense of self, because the sense of self doesn't suddenly disappear because I am in pure awareness. The sense of self is profound and amazing, has so many complexities and so many dimensions to it. It will arise one way or another because this is a process of the mind anyway. So it will come back, the sense will come back, but come back as a particular issue, as a particular concern. It usually, it's an obscuration, and I'm disconnected from the ground because it is an obscuration. And we could look at it as desire or need, which is many spiritual teaching do, and we could do it that way, and that is the yogic way of doing it. The way I have learned to do it is psychodynamically. Is looking at the issue of separation, understanding it and seeing the history. And finally, at some point, when I felt at some point I recognized a sense of separation that I didn't know what existed. I felt I'm separate. First, I felt I can't be myself separate from the other. And the sense of separation that arose was, again, a consciousness, an awareness that has a particular effect, particular quality. This time, instead of feeling sweet and self-valuing, inherent value, it's a sense of energy, a sense of fire, a sense of strength. I remember reading Black and Black Ego Psychology, talking about aggression. And they got to this point of discussion about there is such a thing that's called neutralized aggression. And I always tried to neutralize aggression. What was that? When I experienced the strength, I said, that word sort of comes close to it. Neutralize aggression. I felt a strength, a power that can become anger, can become aggression, can become assertion, but it is, what is it? It's just the strength to be myself. The strength to be. And that became, so it is again, it is the strength to be while I am being what I am. The being itself, the consciousness itself, the awareness itself, manifesting its strength to be itself. Because the self, the individual self, still has issues about being strong enough. Well, can I do it? Am I strong enough? Am I powerful enough? Can I handle it on my own without support? What I saw, that what is needed for separation is a kind of energy, and that's what that psychology has seen, that the person needs to be strong enough, some kind of energy, and sometimes we do it through pushing away, getting angry, pushing the other person. No, I don't want you. It's not me. It's the experience of saying no, to separate. Remember little kids? At the come of the time, everything, no. I realize where this no comes from. It's not me. And here, I'm not saying no. I'm saying yes to myself, saying no to the construct. But I'm not saying no, it's just being it is the no. I didn't need to say no, I didn't need to be angry, I didn't need to push away, I didn't need to separate myself physically or psychologically. I was separate from the construct themselves by being the strength, the energy that allowed me to let go of those and feeling the inherent strength in the awareness itself. And that is again a quality of consciousness, a quality of pure awareness. That is not an emotion, not a thought, not an image, and not influenced by, you could say it's sort of influenced by history, but saying influenced by history is just saying like if you water the plant, it will become green. They say that's a cultural influence. Well, of course, if you let it, it will be itself. But that is not really the same thing as seeing it's the conditioning of the past. So it is true, my being is responding by a quality appropriate to the moment. So you can say it has to do with my history. But it is the quality itself is independent of the history. It is consciousness revealing its strength. And we're realizing that awareness is the source of strength, all power, all energy. As I discussed that, of course, each quality as it arises, it has other nuances and ramifications to it. It affects the quality of awareness. It's like when experiencing awareness as value. Reality, when I look around, it all look nectary and drips with a heart quality. Everything has a sort of melting as nectary. When I'm experiencing such a strength, everything appears luminous in a very beautiful way. There is sort of a glamorous beauty. It's like the essence of glamour, but it is authentic. It is not the glamour of adding something. It is the glamour that comes from the brilliance within. And that is the quality that the strength brings the beauty, the glamorous beauty of reality, the richness. So when we're strong to be ourselves, we also see our beauty. And as we see our beauty, and if we really explore this presence, this consciousness, which we can do psychodynamically, the way I'm exploring it, or we could do by doing meditation and yogic practices. Another thing, I give you a story, or part of the story, tell you how psychodynamic science is useful in spiritual realization. See, the way I'm describing so far, I'm make no distinctions. I'm using the psychological, and the psychological lead to the spiritual inherently by understanding the psychological all the way, to really go to the fundamental grounds of the self. At some point I realized I was experiencing this presence, but after a while, and the presence of course reveals many qualities, but at some point it reveals itself without qualities. Just I recognize that to all these qualities, something characterizes all of them, that they all have some kind of immediacy. An immediacy that has nothing to do with reflection, doesn't have to do with ideas. The immediacy of the consciousness, where is the experiencer and the experienced are the same. It is the quality itself experiencing itself. The presence itself knows itself by being itself. But at some point I recognize sometimes that I'm feeling it this way, sometimes seems it's filling my body, like the value, the sweetness is seeping through all my legs and my veins and my head, and sometimes filling the room, sometimes seems characteristic of the whole universe. And I was wondering, well, how come it changes that way? How come I don't always see it as characteristic of the whole world, which I sometimes see, and seems like it is the nature of everything. It's not the nature of my consciousness. Exploring that, I became aware of some kind of restriction, some kind of a limitation, something that was bounding me, some kind of thing that will limit me, will limit the consciousness and gives it a size and gives it a shape. Exploring that, I recognize, oh, it is a sense of boundary that defines who I am. I recognize a fundamental, boundary for the self. It is like the sense that makes me feel I am the person that I know myself to be. Like I am this person with this body, with this shape, with this size, with this history. I've called it ego boundaries. Meaning how the self is defined by giving it a boundary largely based on the body image and partly based in history and constructs within the mind from all my history and my object relation. When I explored that, I saw myself, I recognized the self as this individual that we call the individual self, person self. I recognize in its totality that this person, it is dynamic and it's alive and it is responsive, But it is not that kind of presence. It is like emotions and feeling and thought with a shape, with contours, and it has an opaqueness to it, and it has ideas and thought and patterns of responsiveness and character. I recognize the person that I am, the normal person that I have to be. It's something I have been all along, but haven't fully recognized it. And usually, for most of us, we're just being that, we do that. We are totally identified with that. We don't know it is really a construct. I'm seeing it as a construct by exploring the limitation of presence itself. I recognize the construct of the individual. So studying developmental psychology and how the sense of being an individual, as especially spelled out by Mahler, develops through separation until finally you become a sense of being a person relating to another person. Looking at that and studying that theory, that's exactly what Mahler said. I have become the person that she talks about. She took it to mean we recognize who we are at that time. She recognized the person we are. And I saw, no, I developed a sense of a person, but right now I'm feeling it as a constriction of being this person. So now I'm not dealing with an issue of this person, I'm dealing with the structure, a whole structure of being an individual person. And I could see the history of how that developed. All the time from early relationship with very primitive structures, which are burly, noble, recognizable, sort of amorphousness and non-differentiation. Sometimes I'm part of my mother, sometimes I'm not. And I even was able to go deeper and experience myself with the structure. At the basis of it, I realized I'm stomach. Called pre-verbal structure. Like the sense of self, at some point, is the consciousness is impressed. Think of it. All psychologists know the more intense the experience, the more repeated it is, the more it will pattern the consciousness, the more it will pattern the mind. What is the very intense, repeatable experience in the first 2 years of life? The experience of the stomach and the mouth. Much more actually than the skin. The skin comes, but the stomach and the mouth, I realized was a pre-verbal underlying structure that was underlying the sense of self. So going through many of those structures, it has many stratification. At some point I recognize that all of these gives me a sense of self. Later on they're more representation, they're more mental. Right? Recognizing that and seeing it. And recognizing this as a structure. And the moment I recognized structure, I remember I was lying down in the living room and I began to shake because I was feeling it as structure. It's like recognizing the self I've taken myself to be all this time and seeing it is all this history and it is really a construct, just the way Jacobson said. Just the way Kernberg, conceptualized it. It's really a construct. And I'm seeing all of my self, all my history as a construct. And I see the construct begin to unravel. Because I'm exploring it without saying, there was a tendency, let me put it back together. It's like a jacket I have to put back, and it gets very thick, very dense, and very obscured. But although it feels like that's me, like when I'm having a hard time. But now me is trying to keep myself together. So I let myself happen. And it was shaking after a while. It was tremendous terror. It was real pure terror. It was just terror going through, all the way through. Just pure terror as the sense of self began to be revealed for what it is. That is a construct from history. And as this terror happened, I can continue with it. As I remember, I was alone. Because many of my experiences, I've had them with friends. I'll be talking with somebody else and help each other. This one, I was alone. And I was shaking, falling apart, disintegrating, and this sense of being this individual self that gave me definition, gave me history, gave me identity, was thinning away, was falling apart. And as it falls away, it falls apart. There's this terror, and I stay with the terror. And the terror in time, if I stay with it, became this very luminous, intense awareness. That's something I found out, and many of the teaching have found out, that fear and awareness are two sides of the same thing. Fear is the primary emotion, right, for all animals, because it is the way we become aware. The animal becomes more alert when they're scared. Here the terror revealed what is as underlying was pure awareness, luminous and brilliant. But as I saw this brilliancy and luminosity, it's like I wasn't the individual. I was this vastness, spaciousness. So I was seeing now the presence of consciousness, the immediacy of being, but without the boundaries that tend to limit it to a location. So it's non-located, it's everywhere. So I will finish in a couple of minutes, but what I wanted to say is that there is what is considered the classic realization, which is realizing of reality as this empty luminosity that is manifesting everything. Pure authenticity. That is the ground of all the qualities I've discussed, but it really manifests not only our bodies, but also manifests its own qualities. Time is up. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Hameed. That was beautiful.